The television studio lights gleamed with their usual intensity, but tonight the atmosphere was charged with something different. Jasmine Crockett, the outspoken and charismatic congresswoman known for her unwavering principles, was about to walk into what she thought would be a standard late-night interview. What unfolded instead would become one of the most talked-about television moments of the year. You are not going to believe what happened when Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stepped onto Jimmy Kimmel's stage. The confrontation that followed was so explosive that producers actually cut the feed before the scheduled commercial break. If you want to know exactly what caused Kimmel to lose his composure and why network executives are now scrambling to do damage control, you need to watch this entire video. And make sure you subscribe and hit that comment section with your thoughts, because this story is still developing. The evening began with the usual fanfare. Jimmy Kimmel's introduction was polished and practiced, his signature smirk firmly in place as he welcomed the Congresswoman to his show. "Please welcome Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett." The audience applauded enthusiastically as Crockett walked onto the stage with confident strides, her smile warm and engaging. "Thank you for having me, Jimmy," she said, settling into the guest chair. "Well, thank you for being here," Kimmel replied, though anyone watching closely might have noticed the slight tightness around his eyes. "So, Congresswoman, you've been making quite a lot of headlines lately. That tends to happen when you're fighting for what's right," Crockett responded with a light laugh. The first few minutes proceeded with seemingly innocent banter, but those familiar with Kimmel's interviewing style could sense something brewing beneath the surface. He was leading somewhere specific, setting up what would later be revealed as a carefully constructed trap. "So, let's talk about your recent speech on health care reform," Kimmel said, leaning forward slightly. "You made some pretty bold claims about the current system." "I did," Crockett nodded firmly, "because the American people deserve to know the truth about who's really benefiting from our health care policies. And it's certainly not the average citizen." Something flickered across Kimmel's face, a momentary break in his practiced television persona. "Well, I've got some clips here I'd like to play for you," he said, gesturing toward the monitor. "Some might call them contradictory to your current position." And that's when the tone of the interview shifted dramatically. What followed wasn't the fair dialogue that Crockett had been promised during her pre-show briefing. Instead, Kimmel began playing selectively edited clips of previous interviews, statements taken completely out of context. "That's not the full context of what I said," Crockett interjected, her composure still intact despite the ambush. "If you play the entire segment, you'll hear that I was specifically referring to—" "But these are your words, Congresswoman," Kimmel interrupted, his voice taking on an edge that his regular viewers rarely heard. "Are you saying you didn't say them?" "I'm saying that editing a 30-minute policy discussion down to a 15-second soundbite deliberately misrepresents my position," Crockett replied, her tone measured but firm. "And I think you know that, Jimmy." The audience, initially enthusiastic, grew uncomfortably quiet. This wasn't the light-hearted banter they had come to expect from the show. Even some of the production crew began exchanging concerned glances. "Let's move on to another topic," Kimmel said, though his body language had grown increasingly tense. "Your committee recently voted on the infrastructure bill. Critics say your position was influenced by special interests." Crockett straightened in her chair. "That's simply not true, and I'd appreciate it if you'd offer evidence for those kinds of accusations." "Evidence? It's all over the news," Kimmel countered, his usual charm completely abandoned now. "Being all over the news doesn't make something factual," Crockett responded, her voice still steady. "As a media figure yourself, I'd think you'd understand the difference between reporting and reality." The tension in the studio was palpable now. Camera operators exchanged glances, and the floor director made a subtle cutting motion with his hand, suggesting they should move to a commercial break. But Kimmel, now visibly agitated, waved him off. "Let's be honest here, Congresswoman," Kimmel said, his voice rising slightly. Your positions change depending on which way the political winds are blowing. The audience gasped. This was beyond the usual political sparring that occasionally happened on late-night shows. This was personal, and it was ugly. Crockett remained composed, though a flash of something, indignation perhaps, crossed her features. "I've served my constituents with integrity since day one," she said. "My positions evolve based on new information and the changing needs of the people I represent. That's not flip-flopping, Jimmy. That's responsible governance." "Is it responsible to make promises you can't keep?" Kimmel shot back. "Is it responsible journalism to ambush a guest with manipulated footage?" Crockett countered, her voice still remarkably controlled given the circumstances. The floor director was frantically signaling for a commercial break now, but Kimmel was too caught up in the moment to notice or care. The interview had gone completely off the rails, transforming from a typical late-night segment into something that would dominate social media for days to come. "You know what I think?" Kimmel said, his voice now carrying an unmistakable edge of contempt. "I think politicians like you are part of the problem. You talk a big game about helping people, but at the end of the day, it's all just talk." The audience was dead silent now, collectively holding their breath. Crockett took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving Kimmel's. "You invited me on this show under the pretense of discussing policy issues that affect real Americans' lives. Instead, you've chosen to engage in personal attacks and deliberately misrepresent my record. That's not just bad interviewing, Jimmy. It's dishonest." Kimmel's face flushed red. For a moment, he seemed genuinely taken aback by her directness. Then his expression hardened. "We'll be right back after this commercial break," he said abruptly, turning away from Crockett toward the camera. The on-air sign dimmed, but the tensions continued to escalate. What happened during that commercial break would soon become the subject of intense speculation across social media platforms and news outlets nationwide. According to multiple sources, within the studio, the confrontation between Kimmel and Congresswoman Crockett was far from over when the cameras stopped rolling. As soon as the cameras stopped rolling, Kimmel tore off his microphone and stood up. "What the hell was that?" he demanded, his voice echoing through the now silent studio. "I could ask you the same question," Crockett replied calmly, though her eyes had hardened. "This wasn't the interview your producers described to my team." The production staff froze in place, caught in the crossfire of a confrontation no one had anticipated. The audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, suddenly unwilling spectators to something that felt intensely private. "Look," Kimmel said, lowering his voice but not his intensity. "This is my show. My show. I ask the questions I want to ask, and I expect straight answers." Crockett stood up as well, refusing to be literally talked down to. "Straight answers require straight questions, Jimmy. Not edited clips, not loaded accusations. If you wanted an actual conversation about policy, I'm more than happy to have it. But that's not what this is, and we both know it." One of the producers approached tentatively. "We're back on in 60 seconds, he said, his gaze darting between the host and his guest. "She's not going back on," Kimmel snapped, pointing at Crockett without looking at her. "Get the musical guest ready to go early." "Excuse me?" Crockett said, her voice steady but lined with steel. "You don't get to dismiss me because you don't like being called out on your tactics." "Actually, I do," Kimmel replied, finally turning to face her directly. "This is my show, and I decide who sits in that chair." The floor manager started the countdown. 30 seconds. "What are you afraid of, Jimmy?" Crockett asked, her voice carrying throughout the studio despite its measured tone. "That I might actually get to speak uninterrupted? That your audience might hear something that contradicts the narrative you're trying to push?" Something dangerous flashed in Kimmel's eyes. The charming persona he presented to America night after night had completely dissolved, revealing something much harder beneath. "Get security," he said to no one in particular, though a production assistant immediately reached for her headset. "You're having me removed?" Crockett asked, her eyebrows raising slightly. It was the first time she appeared genuinely surprised. For what? Defending myself against your mischaracterizations? For disrupting my show, Kimmel replied tersely. 15 seconds, the floor manager called out, panic evident in his voice. One of the executive producers rushed over. Jimmy, think about how this looks. We can't just— I don't care how it looks, Kimmel interrupted. She's not coming back on air. The audience began to murmur, the tension in the studio palpable. Some had their phones out, despite the strict no-recording policy that had been explained before the show. 5 seconds. Fine, Crockett said, gathering her belongings with deliberate calm. But silencing me doesn't make you right, Jimmy. It just proves you're afraid of what I have to say. The on-air light illuminated once more, and Kimmel returned to his desk alone, his smile back in place as though it had never left. Welcome back, he said smoothly to the camera. Unfortunately, Congresswoman Crockett had to leave unexpectedly, but we're lucky to have an amazing musical performance ready to go a little earlier than planned. The audience's reaction was mixed. Confused applause mingled with concerned murmurs as people noticed Crockett being escorted toward the exit by 2 security personnel. What happened next would spark a firestorm of controversy. As Crockett was being led through the backstage area, a production assistant who had witnessed the entire confrontation made a fateful decision. Shelley Morales, a 26-year-old junior staff member who had been with the show for less than a year, pulled out her phone and began recording. Congresswoman, she called out quietly as Crockett passed, I just want you to know that wasn't right. What happened out there? Crockett paused, security guards still flanking her. Thank you, she said simply. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions? The real ones that should have been asked? Morales asked, her phone already recording. Crockett looked at the young woman for a long moment, then nodded. I think the American people deserve to hear what actually happened here tonight. For the next 10 minutes, while Kimmel continued his show as if nothing had happened, Morales conducted an impromptu interview with Crockett in a quiet corner of the backstage area. She asked about the policies that Kimmel had misrepresented, gave Crockett a chance to provide context for the edited clips, and finally asked the question that would soon be on everyone's lips. Why do you think he was so hostile toward you? Tonight? I can't speak to Jimmy's motivations, Crockett replied thoughtfully, but I've noticed a troubling pattern in how certain voices are treated in mainstream media spaces. When you challenge established narratives, when you push for genuine accountability, there's often an attempt to discredit you rather than engage with your ideas. Just as she finished her response, a production manager spotted them. What the hell are you doing? He demanded, approaching quickly. You know the rules about recording backstage? The public has a right to know what really happened, Morales replied, quickly saving the video before the manager could reach her. Give me that phone, he demanded. You're fired, effective immediately. Security was called once again, this time to escort both Crockett and Morales from the building. As they walked out together, Crockett turned to the young woman. I'm sorry about your job. Morales shook her head. Some things are more important than a job. Truth matters. By the time Kimmel's show ended that evening, the backstage video had already been uploaded to social media. Morales, knowing her career at the show was over regardless, had decided to share what she'd captured with the world. The footage spread like wildfire, with millions of views within the first hour. The contrast was stark and undeniable. While Kimmel had returned to his show presenting his usual affable personality, the backstage footage showed a very different man, one who was willing to use his power to silence a voice he couldn't control. Public reaction was swift and divided. Kimmel's loyal fans defended him, claiming that Crockett must have done something during the commercial break to warrant being removed. But others, including many who had been in the studio audience that night, began sharing their own accounts of what they had witnessed. He completely changed once the cameras were off, wrote one audience member in a viral post. It was like watching someone take off a mask. I've been a fan for years, but after seeing how he treated the congresswoman, I don't think I can watch his show the same way again. The network executives were thrown into crisis mode. Emergency meetings were called, publicists were awakened with late-night phone calls, and damage control strategies were hastily assembled. But the story had already taken on a life of its own. By midnight, the hashtag Kimmel kicked Crockett was trending nationwide. Video clips of the interview segment before the commercial break were being analyzed frame by frame, with viewers pointing out the moments when Kimmel's facade seemed to crack, revealing glimpses of the anger that would later explode backstage. For her part, Crockett maintained her composure in the face of the growing media storm. When reporters gathered outside her hotel the following morning, she addressed them with the same measured dignity she had shown on Kimmel's stage. "What happened last night wasn't just about me," she told them. "It's about whose voices are welcome in public discourse and whose are silenced. It's about whether we want media figures to serve as honest brokers of information and discussion, or as gatekeepers who decide which perspectives the public is allowed to hear." Back at the network, the crisis was deepening by the hour. Advertisers were calling, expressing concern about being associated with the controversy. Social media continued to buzz with commentary and speculation. And somewhere in the executive offices, a decision was being made that would shock the entertainment world. The morning after the confrontation, the network's damage control machine was working overtime. Press releases were drafted and discarded, statements were crafted then scrapped, and the executive floor was in a state of barely controlled chaos. The backstage footage had now been viewed over 20 million times across various platforms, and media outlets across the political spectrum were covering the story. "This is a complete disaster," said Marcus Wellington, the network's head of public relations, pacing the length of the conference room where emergency meetings had been ongoing since dawn. "We need Kimmel to make a statement immediately." "He's refusing," replied Sarah Chen, one of the executive producers. "Says he did nothing wrong and won't apologize for running his show the way he sees fit." Wellington stopped pacing and pressed, his palms flat against the conference table. "Does he not understand what's happening out there? This isn't just another Twitter controversy that will blow over in a day. This is different." Indeed, it was different. The story had transcended the usual boundaries of entertainment news and crossed into broader cultural discourse. Political commentators were discussing it as an example of media bias. Journalists were using it to examine questions of power and accountability in television. Even rival networks, typically hesitant to cover each other's scandals too closely, had made it their lead story. Meanwhile, Shelley Morales, the production assistant who had recorded the backstage interview, was experiencing her own whirlwind. After being unceremoniously fired, she had expected to slip into obscurity, perhaps finding work at another show after the controversy died down. Instead, she found herself at the center of a national conversation about whistleblowing and journalistic integrity. "I didn't plan any of this," she explained during an interview with a major morning news program. "I just saw something wrong happening and felt compelled to document it. The public deserves to know who these people really are when the cameras aren't rolling." The interviewer leaned forward. "Have you heard from anyone at Kimmel's show since the video went viral?" Morales nodded. "I've received some threatening messages from people still loyal to Jimmy. They're saying I violated my non-disclosure agreement, that I'll never work in television again. And how do you respond to that?" "Some things are more important than a career," Morales replied, echoing what she had told Congresswoman Crockett the night before. "I don't regret what I did." Back at the network headquarters, the crisis was reaching a boiling point. Advertisers were now explicitly threatening to pull their spots from Kimmel's show, unless the situation was addressed. The network president had called an all-hands meeting for noon, and rumors were swirling about what would be announced. Congresswoman Crockett, meanwhile, had maintained her dignified approach to the situation. Rather than using the controversy to attack Kimmel personally, she had redirected the conversation toward the broader issues at play. "What we witnessed last night is symptomatic of a larger problem in our media landscape," she said during an impromptu press conference. "Too often, those with platforms use them not to inform or to foster genuine dialogue, but to reinforce their own perspectives and silence dissenting voices." Her words resonated with many who had grown disillusioned with the increasingly partisan nature of late-night comedy shows. What had once been a genre dedicated primarily to humor and entertainment had, in recent years, taken on a more overtly political character. And while many viewers appreciated hosts who shared their political leanings, others had grown frustrated with what they perceived as an echo chamber. At exactly noon, network employees filed into the largest conference room, speculation buzzing among them. The network president, Victoria Hargrove, a formidable woman who had navigated numerous controversies during her tenure, stood at the front of the room with an expression that revealed nothing. "As you're all aware," she began once everyone was seated, "we are dealing with a significant situation regarding last night's episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live. I want to assure everyone that we are taking this matter extremely seriously." The room fell silent, all eyes on Hargrove. "After extensive discussions with our legal team, our advertisers, and with consideration for the values this network claims to uphold, we have made the decision to suspend production of Jimmy Kimmel Live for the remainder of the week while we conduct a thorough internal review." Gasps filled the room. Despite the rumors, few had expected such a decisive action against one of the network's biggest stars. "Additionally," Hargrove continued, "we will be implementing enhanced diversity and ethics training for all on-air talent and production staff. And finally, we have extended a formal apology to Congresswoman Crockett and invited her to return to our network for an unedited, primetime interview with a different host." The news spread through the entertainment industry like a shockwave. Jimmy Kimmel, a fixture of late-night television for years, temporarily sidelined. The unprecedented nature of the action underscored the severity with which the network viewed the situation. Kimmel himself finally broke his silence that afternoon with a brief statement posted to his social media accounts. "Regarding last night's show, there are always two sides to every story. I look forward to sharing mine when the time is right." The cryptic message did little to quell the controversy. If anything, it fueled further speculation about what had truly transpired during the commercial break and why Kimmel felt justified in having Crockett removed from his show. Shelley Morales, now being hailed as a hero by some and vilified as a traitor by others, found herself in demand for interviews across multiple platforms. She used this unexpected platform to speak about the culture inside Kimmel's show, revealing patterns of behavior that had previously remained hidden from public view. "It wasn't just with Congresswoman Crockett," she explained during one particularly revealing interview. "There were other guests, especially those with certain political viewpoints, who were treated differently. The questions would be more aggressive, the editing of their previous statements more selective." When asked if she had documentation to support these claims, Morales smiled. "I worked in the research department before being promoted to production assistant. My job was to compile those edited clips. I kept copies of both the original footage and the edited versions used on air. The contrast speaks for itself." This revelation added yet another dimension to the controversy. It wasn't just about one heated exchange that had escalated out of control. It was about a potential pattern of media manipulation designed to shape public perception of certain figures and ideas. Crockett, recognizing the significance of this development, called for a broader conversation about media ethics and responsibility. "What we're seeing here goes beyond one host or one show," she said. "It raises fundamental questions about the role media plays in our democracy and the responsibility that comes with the power to shape public discourse." Industry insiders began coming forward with their own stories, suggesting that the practices at Kimmel's show were not unique but rather reflective of a wider trend in television. The controversy was evolving from a singular incident into a moment of reckoning for an entire industry. By mid-afternoon, the network announced that Congresswoman Crockett had accepted their invitation to appear in a primetime special the following evening. The format would be a town hall-style discussion with questions from a studio audience and minimal moderation from the host. It would be broadcast live, with no editing or delay, a direct response to the accusations of manipulation that had emerged. Public interest in the upcoming appearance was immense. Social media buzzed with speculation about what Crockett might reveal, whether she would directly address Kimmel's behavior, and how the network would handle such a potentially explosive broadcast. For her part, Crockett maintained her focus on the substantive issues. "Tomorrow night isn't about settling scores," she told reporters. "It's about having the conversation that should have happened in the first place. A genuine dialogue about policies that affect real people's lives." Behind the scenes, however, network executives were scrambling to prepare for every possible scenario. Legal teams reviewed potential liabilities. Technical staff were briefed on protocols for maintaining the live broadcast under any circumstances, and security was enhanced throughout the studio facility. The tension was particularly acute given rumors that had begun to circulate about Kimmel potentially showing up unannounced to confront Crockett during the live broadcast. While most dismissed this as unlikely, the network wasn't taking any chances. Additional security personnel were stationed at all entrances, with explicit instructions regarding the suspended host. As evening approached, Crockett spent time preparing not for a confrontation, but for the opportunity to speak directly to the American public without filters or interruptions. She reviewed policy briefings, statistics, and the personal stories of constituents whose lives were affected by the very issues Kimmel had attempted to trivialize. Across town, in his hillside home, Jimmy Kimmel was also preparing. But his preparations took a very different form, one that would have profound implications for everyone involved in the escalating controversy. The day of Congresswoman Crockett's primetime special arrived with an atmosphere of anticipation that extended far beyond the usual television audience. Social media was ablaze with commentary. News channels had dedicated segments analyzing what might unfold, and even late-night comedians on rival networks were making references to the upcoming broadcast in their monologues. Inside the network's headquarters, final preparations were underway. The town hall format had been meticulously designed to prevent any accusation of manipulation or control. The studio audience had been selected to represent diverse political viewpoints. The questions would not be screened in advance, and the host selected to moderate the event was known for his journalistic neutrality rather than entertainment value. "We're trying to overcorrect," admitted Sarah Chen, the executive producer who had been put in charge of the special. "After what happened with Kimmel, we need to demonstrate complete transparency." 3 hours before the broadcast was scheduled to begin, an unexpected development threatened to derail everything. Jimmy Kimmel's lawyer contacted the network with a cease and desist letter, claiming that any discussion of the previous incident during the primetime special would constitute defamation and result in immediate legal action. Network executives huddled with their legal team, weighing their options. "This is clearly an intimidation tactic," said one lawyer. "He knows he can't actually prevent the broadcast, but he can certainly complicate things," countered another, "and create a chilling effect on what can be said." While the executives debated their response, Congresswoman Crockett was informed of the situation. Her reaction surprised everyone. "Tell Mr. Kimmel and his lawyers that I have no intention of focusing tonight's conversation on him or what transpired on his show," she said calmly. "My goal has always been to discuss policy issues that affect the American people. His actions, however revealing, are ultimately a distraction from what matters." Her response diffused the immediate tension, but the legal threat had achieved at least part of its intended effect. Production staff became noticeably more cautious, and preliminary talking points were hastily revised to steer clear of direct references to the controversy. Meanwhile, Shelley Morales was preparing for her own role in the evening's events. To everyone's surprise, Congresswoman Crockett had personally requested that Morales be invited to participate in the town hall as an audience member. The network, eager to demonstrate their commitment to transparency, had agreed despite concerns about potential legal implications. "Are you nervous?" a production assistant asked Morales as she was being fitted with a microphone. "Terrified," Morales admitted with a small smile. "But some moments require courage." As the final hour before broadcast approached, security reported unusual activity outside the studio. A group of Kimmel's most loyal supporters had gathered, carrying signs defending the host and criticizing both the network and Congresswoman Crockett. The gathering was peaceful, but added another layer of tension to an already charged atmosphere. Inside his home, Jimmy Kimmel watched the news coverage of the developing scene with growing agitation. His initial strategy of dismissive silence had backfired spectacularly, allowing others to control the narrative. The network's decision to suspend his show had been a profound humiliation, one that he had not anticipated despite his years in the industry. "They think they can just replace me," he muttered to his agent over the phone, "after everything I've done for their ratings." "Jimmy, you need to stay quiet right now," his agent advised. "Let the lawyers handle this. Any statement you make will just fuel the fire." But Kimmel had spent years being at the center of cultural conversation, wielding his platform to shape public opinion. The experience of being suddenly sidelined, of watching others discuss and dissect his actions without having the ability to respond directly, was proving unbearable. At the studio, final sound checks were completed, and the audience was being seated. Congresswoman Crockett arrived through a private entrance, avoiding the small protest outside. She appeared remarkably composed given the circumstances, greeting production staff warmly and taking time to review the technical aspects of the broadcast without making any special requests or demands. "The format is completely open," the moderator explained during their brief pre-show discussion. "The audience questions haven't been screened, and will be live the entire time. Are you comfortable with that arrangement?" "Absolutely," Crockett nodded. "The American people deserve an unfiltered conversation." 10 minutes before the broadcast was scheduled to begin, security alerted the production team to a situation developing in the parking structure. Jimmy Kimmel had arrived unannounced and was demanding to be allowed into the studio. "He's saying he has a right to defend himself," reported the head of security. "And he's threatening to make a scene if we don't let him in." The network president, who had come personally to oversee the broadcast, made an immediate decision. "Let him in, but keep him in the green room. If he disrupts the broadcast in any way, have him removed immediately." When informed of Kimmel's presence, Crockett's expression revealed nothing. "That's his choice," she said simply. "It doesn't change what I'm here to do." The on-air light illuminated, and the broadcast began. The moderator introduced Congresswoman Crockett to enthusiastic applause from most of the audience, though a small contingent remained noticeably silent. "Thank you for being here, Congresswoman," the moderator began. "Before we open the floor to audience questions, I'd like to give you an opportunity to make an opening statement." Crockett nodded, then looked directly into the camera. "Thank you, and good evening to everyone watching at home. I want to begin by acknowledging that many of you tuned in tonight expecting drama or controversy. That's understandable given recent events, but it's not why I'm here." She paused briefly, then continued with measured conviction. "I'm here to talk about the issues that affect your daily lives. Healthcare policies that determine whether you can afford necessary medications, infrastructure decisions that impact the safety of the roads your children travel on, economic policies that influence whether you can save for retirement or education." In the green room, Kimmel watched the monitor with growing frustration. This wasn't what he had expected. He had prepared for accusations and attacks, ready to burst in and defend himself dramatically. Instead, Crockett was deliberately steering the conversation away from him and toward substantive policy issues. The audience questions began, and true to her word, Crockett addressed each one with thoughtful, detailed responses, focused entirely on policy substance rather than political theater. The contrast between this approach and the ambush she had experienced on Kimmel's show was stark and unmistakable. Halfway through the broadcast, the moderator acknowledged Shelley Morales in the audience. "Ms. Morales, I believe you have a question for the congresswoman?" Morales stood, microphone in hand. The audience fell completely silent. Social media exploded with anticipation, and in the green room, Kimmel leaned forward tensely. "Congresswoman Crockett," Morales began, her voice steady despite the pressure of the moment. "Throughout my career in television production, I've seen how certain voices and perspectives are systematically undermined through editing techniques, leading questions, and other manipulative practices. How can the American public protect themselves against this kind of media manipulation when consuming news and entertainment?" It was a masterful question, directly addressing the elephant in the room without explicitly mentioning Kimmel or the incident. Crockett smiled slightly, recognizing the careful framing. "That's an excellent question," she replied. "Media literacy is fundamentally a civic skill in the modern era. I would advise people to seek out multiple sources of information, to be aware of editing techniques that can distort context, and to remain skeptical when complex policy positions are reduced to simplistic sound bites." She continued, growing, more passionate. "But beyond individual vigilance, we need structural reforms in how media operates. Greater transparency about editing practices, clearer distinction between news and entertainment, and more diverse voices in positions of media. Power would all help create a healthier information ecosystem." In the green room, something shifted in Kimmel's expression. The response he had prepared, the confrontation he had envisioned, suddenly seemed small and petty in contrast to the substantive discussion unfolding on stage. For perhaps the first time, he was seeing the situation not from the perspective of his wounded ego, but through the eyes of viewers witnessing a fundamental contrast in approaches to public discourse. As the broadcast continued, audience questions ranged from healthcare policy to climate initiatives to economic reform. Crockett addressed each with specific, detailed responses that demonstrated both expertise and genuine concern. There were no gotcha moments, no personal attacks, no attempts to score cheap political points, just substantive engagement with complex issues. The ratings were climbing by the minute. What had begun as an audience drawn by the promise of controversy was staying for something entirely different. Authentic, unfiltered discussion of issues that affected their daily lives. With 15 minutes remaining in the broadcast, the unexpected happened. Jimmy Kimmel walked onto the stage. A murmur ran through the audience. Security personnel moved to intercept him, but Crockett raised a hand to stop them. "It's all right," she said, her voice picked up by her microphone. "Let him speak." The moderator, momentarily flustered, recovered quickly. "Mr. Kimmel, this is certainly unexpected. Would you like to address the audience?" Kimmel approached the second microphone that had been set up for audience questions. For a moment he simply stood there, the confident performer suddenly appearing, uncertain. Then he spoke, his voice lacking its usual polished delivery. "I came here tonight planning to defend myself," he began, "to tell my side of the story and explain why I did what I did on my show the other night." He paused, looking around at the audience, then at Crockett, who was watching him with composed attention. But sitting back there, listening to this conversation, this actual substantive discussion about policies that matter, I realized something. What happened on my show wasn't about different political views or even about the specific issues. It was about control. My need to control the narrative, to have the last word, to never be challenged on my own stage. The studio was completely silent now, everyone transfixed by this unexpected turn of events. "Congresswoman," Kimmel continued, turning to address Crockett directly, "I owe you a public apology. The way you were treated on my show was unprofessional and frankly unacceptable. I've spent years criticizing others for abusing their power while failing to recognize when I was doing the same thing." Crockett nodded acknowledgement but allowed him to continue without interruption. "And to Shelley Morales," Kimmel added, looking toward where she sat in the audience, "you weren't disloyal to the show by recording what happened. You showed a commitment to truth that I should have valued more highly in my own work." The broadcast ran over its scheduled time, extended by network executives who recognized they were witnessing a rare moment of genuine accountability in an industry often criticized for its lack thereof. By the time the on-air light finally dimmed, something fundamental had shifted in the cultural conversation. What had begun as yet another polarizing media controversy had transformed into a moment of reflection about the responsibilities that come with public platforms and the value of substantive dialogue over performative confrontation. In the days and weeks that followed, the aftermath continued to unfold in unexpected ways. Jimmy Kimmel announced he would be taking a temporary hiatus from television to reassess my approach to comedy and commentary. Shelley Morales was hired by a rival network to help develop new standards for interview ethics, and Congresswoman Crockett found herself with an expanded platform to discuss the policy issues she had always prioritized. The incident became a case study in journalism schools and media studies programs nationwide, an example of how a toxic moment of conflict transformed into an opportunity for growth and greater accountability. And somewhere in America, viewers who had tuned in expecting entertainment found themselves engaged instead in consideration of how media shapes our understanding of complex issues and what we lose when substance is sacrificed for spectacle.